Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight, author and journalist Caroline Overington, the government whip and Liberal member for Herbert, Ewen Jones, commentator and self-confessed stirrer Jane Caro, former opposition leader John Hewson is now professor at ANU's Crawford School of Public Policy, and West Australian Labor MP Alannah MacTiernan. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Now remember, you can watch Q&A live across Australia on either ABC TV or ABC News 24 and listen on News Radio. Well, our Facebook followers want us to talk about the double dissolution, banking royal commission and the 60 minutes kidnap, if you'd like to call it that, and we'll get to all of those shortly. Our first question is from Robert Gubbin.
As the polls at the weekend show, Malcolm Turnbull and the coalition's government popularity continues to slide, while Bill Shorten and Labour are rising. Given that the electorate seems to favour the Labour Party's proposal for a royal commission into the banks rather than the case for the re-establishment of the ABCC, does the panel think that the Turnbull government is taking a great risk by calling a double dissolution on the basis of the Senate's rejection of their ABCC legislation?
John Hewson, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, look, I think Turnbull's taking quite a big risk, actually. I was very surprised that he didn't go to an election almost straight away when he became leader. I think he could have just said, look, I don't have a mandate, set some broad directions, and I think he would have done very well in that election. Since then, of course, his popularity has waned. His net satisfaction rating is now negative. It's 50-50, I guess, in the polls today, or the last couple of polls. Yes, so it's all to be done. I think it's a close contest. I think Shorten is a person who runs on confidence. He's had a bit of a boost to his confidence in recent days, so he's looking slightly better, whilst Turnbull's have been struggling. So I do think it's a contest. And some of the issues you mentioned, they may not end up dominating the campaign. They're certainly at the start of the campaign. You
think the ABCC is more a pretext for a double dissolution than a serious issue?
I think the issue is broader than that. I think it's sort of union governance, and each of those bills and now the transport changes as well are all in the context of union governance, union power, union influence. I'm not sure you can sustain that, though, for an entire campaign. I think there'll be other issues that'll come to the fore. And
certainly hope so. It's going to be a very long campaign.
Well, they tend to go back to the basic issues, education, health, and so on, as very important issues.
Let's go to Ewen Jones.
Thanks, Tony. Look, thanks for your question. I don't think it's a big risk at all. And I think you just see every election that polls always shorten up anyway. I think that's a fact of life. What do you want to get out of a banking royal commission that ASIC doesn't already have those powers to do? That's the question for mine. And I think coming from my seat in Townsville, where on a work site, I've got a mate of mine who's a concrete pumper, who's been at a CFMU work official, walk up to him, poke him in the chest, say, don't bother putting your chit in here, mate, it's our site. Those are the sorts of things that we have to watch out for. What we have to watch out for...
You did say chit there, didn't you?
He doesn't put it in your chit.
No, fair enough, that's all right.
With a C.
I just want to make sure.
So where I come from in Townsville, it's about making sure that my second and third tier builders, my guys who do that 20 to 30 to 40 million turnover, are given a fair shot at government work. That's where your training is done. What we find with governments at the moment are big tenders where your local guy doesn't get a real shot at it. And that's where you find your training misses out, and that's where union governance really comes to a head.
Ewen, I'm just going to... actually, sorry, our questioner has his hand up. I'll get back to you.
I just have a sense that the government seems very frightened by the Royal Commission. The government's desperation to emphasise the powers of ASIC somehow doesn't, I'm not sure it convinces anybody.
Robert, we've got another question on this, so I'll go to that one as well straight away. It's from David Baker. David?
Right. What does the Liberal Party have to lose by having a royal commission on the banks? Does it outweigh the political costs of being publicly perceived as yet another right-wing party defending the interests of the rich? Why let the Labour Party steal the march on public opinion by defending people as unpopular as bankers?
Yeah, Ewen, so I'll bring you back in on that because you spoke to one side of the question, the ABCC, but not to the banking issue. So tell us why you think it's a bad idea to have a Royal Commission.
Again, I think it's a wonderful political stunt to come out and say we need a Royal Commission into this. But what is a Royal Commission? A Royal Commission, and we saw questions today about someone who's received bad financial advice, and the Royal Commission is going to fix that up. No, it won't. The Royal Commission will run for 3 years. And it won't help that person who's received the bad advice. Don't forget.
I don't think your Union Royal Commission ran for 3 years, did it?
Sorry?
Your Union Royal Commission didn't run for 3 years. Doesn't it really depend on the terms of reference?
But we took that to an election. So if Bill Shorten wants a Royal Commission, let him take it to an election. We took the ABCC to an election in 2013.
I think he is taking it to an election. That's precisely what he's doing. I'll just quickly go to Alannah MacTiernan to hear on this.
Yeah, look, I think if I could weave in both questions, I think the really important thing about the Royal Commission into banking is that we believe that there's a cultural issue here that is driving this bad behaviour at the banks, that we do think that this is a systemic matter that has to be dealt with. We really have to look at whether or not that just looking after shareholder value is in fact driving a very negative culture. So we think that there is a very strong case for a Royal Commission. And can I just say on that large question, I think the really extraordinary, it is amazing how badly Malcolm Turnbull's done. I think none of us expected that he would have backed himself into such a corner after starting off with such a huge popularity. And I think now he's found himself really locked into this double dissolution, even though it's actually, on all the analysis now, is not in fact going to give him a better result in the Senate. In fact, he's not likely to improve, in fact may even go backwards in the Senate. And at the same time, he's now arguing, oh, we're so much in favour of this law in relation to unions, which is not really the essence of where he is at as a political leader. He has actually been saddled with Tony Abbott's agenda and being forced, as a former banker, to actually be out there as the great defender of the banking system. I just think he's been backed into a dreadful, dreadful corner.
OK, can I just a quick follow-up on the Banking Royal Commission? If it's so obvious that banks need new regulations, why not simply regulate and do that? Because there's been millions of inquiries. I mean, I'm exaggerating. There have been many inquiries into the banking system. Well, it must be obvious what policy levers need to change.
And look, it's certainly there is certainly possible to sort of legislate in some areas, but what I think really is emerging is this notion that that there's something in the banking culture. There is something in the way that they have been driving forward to protect shareholder value and perhaps value of senior executives that has actually compromised that the prudential respect that banks have. So I don't think that all the solutions are in fact all that obvious. And I think that there is an important process here, and it doesn't need to go on for 3 years.
So I want to hear from the other panellists on the banking issue. And John Hewson, start with you briefly, and we'll go to the others.
Look, I don't think you do need a Royal Commission. I think what you need is action. I mean, people understandably don't like the banks. I mean, in almost every election I can remember, bank bashing has been a feature of the election. Having said that, I mean, there is a need to make change. We've just had a major inquiry into the banking system, one of many inquiries into the banking system, and I agree that the culture of bankers has to change, and the way to change it is to change the remuneration structures of the management of banks. And where you pay bonuses...
That's a bit of a socialist idea, isn't it?
Well,
I mean,
maybe it is, but you need to make sure that they don't just get given bonuses on the basis of short-term performance. It's got to be longer-term, sustained performance. And in fact, I'd like to see a system where they have to give the bonuses back when something goes wrong. I remember an interview with the head of Lehman Brothers after the global financial crisis, and he was called on by a congressional inquiry in the US, and he was asked, did he think it was a bit obscene that he'd been paid something like $500 million in bonuses in the previous 6 years? And of course, he said, no, I've actually created real value. And they were incredulous. Where's the value? The place has just collapsed. It's almost brought the banking system to its knees. That's the basis of the culture. The cultural problem is in the remuneration structure of bankers and the incentives. But
essentially you're saying you can do this without a Royal Commission?
Yes, and ASIC has got the powers to actually drive a lot of change. As far as individuals who are disadvantaged are concerned, you can take class actions. There have been a number of class actions already initiated, and there are a lot of lawyers all over town ready to go to take on the bank because of ill treatment.
All right, let's.
And so on.
We're going to come back to the Malcolm Turnbull question, Caroline. So on the banks, the Banking Royal Commission versus the ABCC.
You know, I don't think that the public wants a Royal Commission into the banks, and I don't think that they particularly wanted a Royal Commission into the unions either. I think that the public would like the government to get on with governing. Because if this goes ahead, this election, and all the indications now are that it will, we could be looking at 6 Prime Ministers in 6 years. And I think the public has had enough. We are entering the era of the disposable Prime Minister. It used to be you had a disposable opposition leader. Parties would get rid of someone they thought perhaps couldn't win. But now we're cutting down leaders in their first term. And we're doing it regularly. And what Malcolm Turnbull has done here is organise for himself another election, which means that we have to go to the polls again. And as you say, there is a good chance that he will come to the wire. I mean, I personally don't see the Australian public lining up to elect Bill Shorten. That is my view. I don't think they're out there in huge numbers, but certainly he is at risk.
Jane.
I'm really interested in what the questioner, about the fact that it's an interesting idea that Malcolm Turnbull is turning away from the Royal Commission into the banks. And what I don't like about what's happening is we seem to be using Royal Commissions now for political purposes. So we had a Royal Commission into the unions for basically what I saw as political posturing, and now we're getting payback in a Royal Commission into the banks as a form of political payback that happens as well. And this seems to me a misuse of Royal Commissions. I think that the Royal Commission, for example, into institutional child sexual abuse is an incredibly important thing and has been very, very valuable for Australia and for a great many people and for the future of our society. And using them as a kind of stick to beat the people you oppose is debasing the currency, and that worries me a great deal.
Or a method to create policy that you could come up with yourself in government.
Exactly, and it just feels like the wrong thing to do. And isn't it interesting? We're becoming so polarised. This is like, if you like, the two sides of Australian politics in the raw. Banks versus unions. Do we have to be so black and white? Unions are necessary for a functioning democracy. Well, they're a basic and important thing. So are banks. Do we have to have them as the opposite ends of who we are as a country? And yet this seems to be the way that our politicians are positioning it. And I think that it's wrong of them and they should stop it.
Well, OK, remember, it's election season. Thank you very much. It is election season. If you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quandra, and keep an eye on our Twitter account for the verdicts from the ABC fact-checking unit and the Conversations academics. Our next question comes from Hakan Honeini. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
It's all right. Good evening. Before becoming Prime Minister, Mr. Turnbull would often talk about having the courage of your convictions to take on policy issues that are for the good of the nation, but may not be as popular. However, since becoming Prime Minister, there has been a vacuum in the area of taxation policy, with backflips and not even considering tax proposals because they may be unpopular. So where has the courage of the Prime Minister's convictions gone? And is this indecision likely to characterise his prime ministership if he is re-elected?
Start with John Hewson again.
Thank you. We're getting all the wonderful questions. Obviously Malcolm did a deal to get there. And the deal he did actually compromise some of the basic positions that he'd previously held and held publicly. There's a fellow running in the seat of Wentworth, my old seat, against Malcolm, who just wants the old Malcolm to come back. The guy that stood for gay marriage and for no plebiscites and climate change and tax reform and so on. And I think that's been a major reason why his popularity has collapsed.
Do you think he doesn't stand for those things anymore?
I think
or are you saying that he can't talk about climate change because of a deal he did with the Conservatives in his own party?
In the Conservative side of the party, held him to the Abbott policy on climate change. So he's tied into the targets that were set for the Paris Agreement. He's tied into the abolition of Clean Energy Finance Corporation and so on. The only area he's not tied into, by the way, is renewables. And I'm hopeful that he provides a bit of leadership in that area and says, let's have a 2030 target for renewables that's consistent with the 26 to 28% reduction that has been committed. But, you know, the problem, I think, one of the problems Malcolm has is that he's always wanted to be Prime Minister. He goes around the country saying it's an exciting time to be an Australian. What he needs to add is 2 more words, Prime Minister. It's definitely an exciting time, and until he delivers, people are going to doubt, just like these questions are showing.
Caroline.
Look, there's no question that Malcolm has been disappointing to a number of people. I mean, people expected him to be doing a lot of the things that he is not doing, but there are political realities associated with being the Prime Minister. And one of them is that you can't have your way on all of those issues that are so important. And I think what the questioner is saying is that you're one of those people who expected him to be doing a whole lot more than he is. But unfortunately, he is caught in the realities of politics. And that may well prove to be his downfall.
Caroline, how do you explain some of the backflips and missteps? I mean, the greatest reform of the Federation since World War II, the backsliding on taxation, which the questioner, or taxation reform, which the questioner referred to.
Well, they're not really backflips. What he does, he has a tendency to float out a policy and then quickly withdraw it. And it's an interesting tactic that he uses. It's almost like market testing. And he's a bit like that. It seems to me sometimes watching him that he thinks that governing the country is a bit like running a business. And he was really good at running a business. He seems to think that if I go out and say that this can happen or this should happen, then it will happen. But that's not the way politics works in Australia. So I think he's struggling. He's definitely struggling to find his feet. He should be a lot further ahead. There was a lot of hope in the air when he first took the leadership from Tony Abbott. But I think we can tell from the mood in this room that a lot of people are really disillusioned.
Jane Caro.
Yeah, and I think the problem with the testing of the policies, I know he scared the pants off me with his Gonski ideas, hanging public schools out to dry and leaving private schools close to his bosom, but letting the public schools rot. The problem with that is that it terrifies people and they become very wary of the Prime Minister who is testing ideas, because there's a whole lot of people who don't necessarily agree with a lot of the things that are being put out there. And that then makes them go, hang on a second, I thought this guy was going to be a real small L Liberal. And now what I'm getting is someone who I don't quite know where he's going to go next, what idea he's going to put forward next. And that's the problem, because if you're going to get people to have confidence in you, and what we're desperately lacking across our society is trust. Trust in our institutions, trust in politicians, trust in business, trust in unions, you name it, the media, everybody. Nobody trusts anybody anymore. You are going to have a really coherent narrative, a story that you can tell that people feel they can rely on. I think John Howard, for much of his prime ministership, much as I disagreed with him on a lot of things, did manage to create a kind of solid, reliable narrative. And that's why he was seen as Honest John. We haven't had a strong, solid narrative from a leader for a very long time. And that's why we keep tossing them out, because we don't know who they are, we don't know what they stand for, and they scare us.
Well,
Ewen Jones...
We're not tossing them out, they're tossing them out themselves.
Well, yes, but the public are right behind all the toss-outs so far.
Well, in theory. Ewen Jones, there's an awful lot of ground to make up if you're hearing the messages coming from this audience and this panel.
I look at things...
And not to mention the opinion polls.
Yeah, but, look, again, I'm in government, we don't look at opinion polls.
Except secretly late at night, the moment they come out.
I look at things slightly differently, and I think you're right in asking that question, you're right in feeling that, because perception is reality. But what I saw with the GST was him floated out there. When we sat down, we found out that you can raise $30 billion, but it's going to cost you the best part of $15 billion in payments for compensation for people, and then all this other stuff you've got to do with it, and it leaves you about $3 to $5 billion through which to drive reform. It's just not possible. And with the state, when the premiers came down, they've been talking about it since November, and when the premiers came down, the problem we have in this country is with the balance that the government that spends the money doesn't raise the money. And you've got Jay Weatherill at the moment cutting tax in South Australia but telling the federal government to raise taxes to do it. So when Malcolm Turnbull said to them, and I thought he did it pretty well, and said, you guys are part of the answer. The only person that stood up there and said, OK, I'm part of the answer, is Colin Barnett. The rest of the premiers were quite happy to sit there and say, no, we're quite happy to borrow the car on Saturday night. We don't want the responsibility. We don't want that.
They don't want the responsibility, Ewen, of having to raise income taxes because that's what they expect the federal government would do if it needs to raise money. Isn't that part of the problem here? The spectre of raised income taxes all around the country, in fact, different rates of income tax all around the country, was floated, left alive for 48 hours and then killed off.
Right. So it was pulled off because the state governments rejected it completely. But
you still think it'd be a good idea to do it, given the response you got from the country?
What the Prime Minister did was said, we've got to look at the way we do things way we do tax differently. Wherever I go in my electorate, I'm pushed with two things: payroll tax and stamp duty are the two things that everyone in business raises with me all the time. Payroll tax and stamp duty. They're heinous taxes. Everyone in the state government understands they're heinous taxes. They're a tax on employment. And yet, if we take those away, the states can't raise their money. But they don't want to give those things away. So they're a tax on employment, they're a tax on jobs. Shouldn't we start the conversation around tax reform about the things we want to get rid of? What Malcolm was doing, what I think the Prime Minister was doing, is starting to draw the premiers in to say, you've got to be part of this, that the Federation is part of the answer here, not just the federal government raising or lowering taxes.
So do you think you'll have another crack at it in the next term, or is it dead, as everyone said it was?
Look, I think I've always believed that the Federation White Paper is something that is hugely important. I think the Federation, as we see it, just isn't working. And I always say that, I'm not a centralist or a federalist, but to have 9 ministers for education in Australia, to have 9 ministers for health, 9 ministers for transport, and all these things there.
So this idea that was dead and buried is actually alive.
It's alive where I go in my electorate. It's alive where I go in my electorate because everyone who's got a business, everyone who's a medium-sized employer, says, okay, so I get close to $1 million or $1.125 million in Queensland or whatever it is now. And then I have to start putting on people on subcontractor because I can't afford to keep on paying them because the payroll tax. And it's the whole thing about where you're going to...
I'll tell you what, we're going to... I want to hear from Alannah MacTiernan on the question that was actually asked.
OK, look, everyone understands the compromises that Malcolm Turnbull made about climate change and marriage equality in order to keep the right wing in the cart. Understand that. Not that I approve, but understand it. But what has absolutely surprised us all is that Malcolm Turnbull didn't actually have an economic plan. That he'd been sitting there all that time waiting to be leader and he gets the nod and there's no economic plan. I mean, I would have expected there to be a mini budget in December or January or February at the latest. Instead, this sort of, after about 5-6 months, we see a few ideas floated out. And Ewen, with respect, the idea that Malcolm Turnbull wouldn't have had access to the many, many Treasury documents that have been prepared showing what the collection costs were of a GST increase compared to how much you would raise. So all of that stuff would be well known. I mean, as if you would float at COAG for the first time around the idea of a state income tax without actually having done the background work. I mean, this is what is surprising, that everyone expected Malcolm Turnbull to be so much more competent, me included. I have been astounded by how he just has not been able to grasp this economic stuff.
And from your point of view, the Labor is going into the election promising to raise new taxes, $100 billion plus of new taxes, most of which will go on spending. How are you going to fix up the budget deficit?
Well, I don't think you can quite say that yet because I think, as Chris Bowen has said to you in his many interviews with you,
we can certainly say most of it because he would even admit to that much.
Yeah, there is certainly a substantial amount will go to ensuring that schools and hospitals are not subject to unsustainable cuts. I mean, part of the problem with the Tony Abbott $87 million cut from health and education, it was never going to be doable. I mean, you were never going to be able to pull back on those basic services. I mean, you'll have the argument about whose responsibility it is, but at the end of the day, it would be politically unsustainable to do that. So part of what we will be doing will be making delivering a package which is in fact capable of being enacted, and there will be a certain envelope, and I can't tell you at this point, I'm a bit down the food chain to be able to tell you how big that envelope's going to be, but some of it will be going into what will be a slow process of budget repair.
Okay, let's move along. It's time for our next question on a completely different subject. Comes from, and we'll come back to some of these other big issues during the show, but it comes from Imogen Harper.
Kidnapping is an illegal offence, not only here but in most countries. So how can it be encouraged and somewhat justified by the media? Is the situation in Beirut just a case of bad luck for the TV crew, or reflective of a deeper problem within the Australian media of increasing arrogance, ignorance, or something else?
Caroline, I'll throw it to you, the only other journalist on the panel.
Well, firstly, I don't think we know what has happened in Beirut. It hasn't yet come before the court, so we need to be a little cautious as to what has happened. I'll say no journalist that I know likes the idea that money changes hands for stories. I don't like it, and I don't know any journalists who really do like it, but the fact is that it happens. What has happened in this particular case, we don't know. We don't know whether or not the mother, Sally, has, in her desperation, decided to employ these child retrieval experts to go and get her children.
We do know,
back.
Caroline, what the child retrieval expert, the leader of this operation, Adam Whittington, is saying in your own newspaper, which is that he was paid by 60 Minutes.
But again, that's not been tested in court. That has not been tested in court.
No, yet you've published it.
Of course, and that's very cheeky of you. Of course we've published it, because we've published what Sally's had to say, we've published what the child retrieval experts have had to say, we've published comments from Tara Brown, we've published comments from the family. We're covering all angles, but there's still a court case that we need to go through before anyone can definitively say what happened. It seems to me that the problem of children being taken from their parents abroad and not brought back is a massive problem in Australia and growing all the time. So it will one day happen on the streets here, for sure. For sure, you will be getting people coming here to retrieve their children. And I think the position that Sally found herself in was one of desperation, where, for example, if you think the Australian Federal Police, if you're going to go to the Australian Federal Police and say someone has taken my children, if you think they're going to launch a team abroad to bring your children back, you're sorely mistaken. It is not going to happen. Nobody is going to help you. The family court can't help you and the police can't help you, and Sally had no money. And so it does seem to me that maybe what has happened here, as she has, in her desperation, reached for the help of the child retrieval experts, and the media has seen that this is a good story and jumped on board. But before we know the facts, it's very difficult to judge.
So, Caroline, if the facts are as alleged in your newspaper, should we expect the higher-ups at Channel 9, indeed anyone who might have signed off on such a payment that's led to their own crew being jailed for an indefinite amount of time and facing, well, mortal peril, should they all resign?
I would be staggered to hear that anybody went to a lawyer at Channel 9 and said, we need $115,000 because we intend to kidnap 2 children off the streets of Beirut, and that the lawyer then said, no problem, here's your cheque.
They would have said, we're going to give it to child retrieval experts. They wouldn't have described them as kidnappers.
No, one would assume not. I mean, it does seem to me that heads will roll at 9. But right now, we don't know what happened. We just don't know. And it's a desperate situation for Sally, for the children, for her husband, and for the families that are currently incarcerated in Beirut.
Okay, let's hear from another panellist. Jane, Caro.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you sum it up pretty well, Carolyn. I mean, I feel desperately sorry for the mother, and I do understand how that could lead you to think, damn the law, I'm going to do absolutely everything I can to get my children back. I think it's a great shame she seems to have fallen into the hands of people who weren't very good at retrieving children. And I worry very much for the crew of 60 Minutes, less than I worry about the mother, who I think her motivations I understand better. And I think that, you know, we are in a situation where getting eyeballs, getting people to pay attention to anything is so hard now, and there is a temptation to run off towards any story that looks like it's going to get a whole lot of attention.
And the question really was about, if we just stick with that for a moment, the question was about journalistic ethics,
Yes.
essentially, and whether a line has been crossed here.
Well, yes, I
and
think it has.
Yes, and if somebody at Channel 9 has authorised a payment of $115,000 for children to be kidnapped off the street, then my profession has jumped the shark.
Yeah.
I would be shocked and horrified if that was true.
It's inconceivable, isn't it, that it could have happened without the knowledge, at least of the executive producer, presumably other people up the chain. Someone has to write cheques or send money if money has been paid.
And that's why I'm hoping, perhaps against hope, I'm hoping that this was something that Sally was going to do anyway. That the child retrieval experts had gone to her and said, we can get your kids back, and played on her desperation. And that she had then told 60 Minutes, this is what I'm going to do. Tara Brown was not actually there. She was in her hotel room. The 60 Minutes crew, but for one, were not actually there when this happened. So I'm really hoping
because they turned up moments after that two detectives sitting in a cafe across the road became suspicious in the first place.
Right.
Can I quickly go to the other panellists? And John, I heard you sort of, groaning, I think was the best way of describing.
Well, I thought the question was focused on journalistic ethics. Look, you'd have to say that the most wicked thing you can do is separate a mother from her children. And we should start with that presumption, understand the desperation of Sally and the circumstances that she found herself in for a combination of reasons, legal systems in different countries and so on. Very complex set of circumstances. But I do wonder just how far Channel 9 pushed chequebook journalism. I think they obviously pushed it way too far. I hope that out of this we get that Sally gets some sort of shared custody. May not be possible under the Lebanese legal system, I don't know. But I suspect they'll throw the book at Channel 9, and I suspect they should.
Can I just put in a word for the poor sound recordist and camera operator, neither of whom I dare say ever get consulted about what sort of stories they are going to be sent on. They're just rostered on and off they go and do what they're doing. They must feel like they've just dropped into hell. And I think that now puts sound recordists and camera operators on notice. They better know what story they're going to.
Ewan, briefly on the ethics of this, journalistic ethics.
Anyone who's been through a custody dispute will understand where Sally's coming from in this. And look, I don't really point the finger at 60 Minutes in this. I think if you've got a desperate mother in front of you or a desperate parent, and this little boy and little girl, it's a very hard story to say no to. I mean, put the money to one side. There could be, let's wait till that story comes out. But if you're sitting there facing that sort of thing, as someone who has been in that situation and someone who has been a single parent, your children being threatened is the most abhorrent thing you'll ever go through in your life. And when, in our jobs, we get a lot of family law and people leaving the country with kids, it's just soul destroying. And I think, let's just wait and see what actually comes out here on the journalistic ethics side of it. But I'd like to think on the good side of here that someone's actually backed Sally to try and get her kids back.
Alannah.
Yeah, can I just 2 points? Just want to pick up. I understand what you're saying. Is there a bit of arrogance behind this, that our law must be superior to the Lebanese law, and I think that is something that we have to be conscious of. But picking up a point that you made, Caroline, I honestly think it's a huge problem. And in 25 years in elected office, you do get to deal with so many of these family court cases, and sometimes it can be parents that are allowed legally to take their children out of the country, and then the orders cannot be enforced against them. And this is not just in Lebanon, and this happens for people whose children have been taken to Canada or to Scotland. It's an enormous cultural and social problem that I think that we've got to do a lot more to work out an effective process, because from what I've seen, the Hague Convention just really isn't dealing with all of these problems. So
Lebanon hasn't signed it.
And Lebanon hasn't signed it, but even where? I mean, I have spent so much time dealing with cases where we are dealing with enforcement of orders in countries that are signatories, and that's hard.
Okay, we've got to move on because we've got lots of issues to deal with. The next question, in fact, comes from Alexandria Robertson. It pertains to someone who was going to be on the panel but is no longer. Alexandria.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, on Friday you made headlines by shedding tears during a press conference with Employment Minister Michaelia Cash. What was behind this display of emotion, and what do you think the long-term impact will be on Queensland and its workers regarding the collapse of Queensland Nickel?
Thank you very much for your question. Look, the moment got very big on me very quickly, and when you're in a city like Townsville, this is hurting. This is hurting our economy. And as much as you go to the meetings with the people, and it's not so much the people who've been working there 30 and 40 years, it's the people who've been working there 5 years. It's the people who've got the young babies. They're the ones that you feel for. And to finally be able to get them the road to pass out their entitlements so that they can get that. But everywhere you go in Townsville, be it the coffee shop, Myer, anywhere in town, someone from Queensland Nickel's husband or wife or brother or sister or cousin works at Queensland Nickel. And it's part of our city. And the problem with this thing is that the business is a viable business. It's a peak and trough business linked to the price of steel. And what we had to do is make sure that you were prepared for it. And since 1975 or the early 1970s, when this thing started, this has happened. And it's only since Mr. Palmer took over and then the shadow directorships and the poor management of this thing that these people, this viable business has been lost. Now, we are a city in transition. We are probably the face of transition. There's never been a more exciting time to be from Townsville, I'm telling you right now.
There's never been an exciting time to be from Townsville.
That's right. But we will be...
Spoken like a true Sydney
sider. My city will never be defined by Mr. Palmer or Terry Smith or Clive Mensink or the management of Queensland Nickel. We are actively out there trying to develop our city. But that hurt last Friday. That really hurt that this was an end to a thing. And so, we're actually, we've been doing a thing about redefining Townsville, trying to find out where we are to now. And this is where my government is so important with our Northern Australia agenda, with our innovation agenda, with the Defence White Paper. And we've been trying to redefine what Townsville actually stands for and where to from here. And we're going to be having an ideas forum in November, and lots of people at home who are running this. It's not a government thing that Townsville's doing, trying to redefine itself.
We're going to come to the broader issue, Ewan, in a moment. Yeah. Let me just stick with Clive Palmer for a moment. The accusation that he used that refinery as a piggy bank. His argument is it was going to go down because of the price of nickel. So what's your view?
Well, quite frankly, it's rubbish. The price of nickel is intimately linked with the price of steel, and at the moment we do have a low price of steel, and so the nickel price is low. But you do know, because it's a boom and bust, it's a peak and trough business. So what you do know is when you're making the good time, you must put money aside. So when Clive Palmer said that when he signed off on the audit and said that there was going to be a $73 million surplus next year, that's rubbish, because what he should have had was money left over there. So when you see things like about $185 million worth of forgiven loans, about to even put aside the support for the political party, but all these things that he did with the money in Queensland Nickel, or that the directors signed off on Queensland Nickel, that should have been there to ensure that this business was viable during a low time, because it's happened before and it'll happen again. So that's the whole thing. But we want to have this ideas forum in Townsville, and we think Q&A should come to Townsville in November. And we think Q&A should come to Townsville.
We'll take that as an idea.
Yes, take that as an idea.
Caroline.
Look, I think it's my personal opinion only that Clive Palmer ought to be ashamed of himself. Firstly, because he made my new friend cry, but also because what he's done to families in that area is a catastrophe for them. They are young people, often young men, trying to support wives and children in a town where there are not a lot of options. And I think that Clive is a man of genuine ability, and he seems to have a lot of energy about him. He seems to have considerable charm. He was able to convince people to elect him to the Parliament. That may come to an end now, but it seems to me that he somehow imagines that his big dinosaurs and his boats will comfort him in the days ahead. And I can assure him that he is wrong, because for all of us, there will come a day when we are lying very quietly by ourselves alone, staring at the ceiling, and we will need to ask ourselves, how did I behave? Am I comfortable with the person that I am? And I'm not sure that Clive Palmer right now can answer that question in the affirmative.
John Hewson, how much damage do you think has been done to the reputation of Australian business by this? I mean, it feeds into this whole notion that the super rich don't consider themselves to be part of the regular society.
That's true. I mean, I think it brings back some of the ghosts of the 1980s and the Alan Bonds and Christopher Scases, and so the excesses of those people, while they might have done some good things for periods of time in businesses they built and opportunities they created and jobs they created, they were not sustainable. And when you look at what Clive appears to have done there, I don't know enough of the specific detail, but he has got a case to answer. There's no doubt about that. I think probably the nickel price is an important part of it, but you can't just pin it on that when you have such excesses coincidental with that. So I do think that he has a case to answer. And, but in this country we do have a fundamental tendency, and it's true at government level, of getting onto the good times and thinking they'll last forever. I mean, before the global financial crisis, we had unexpected wealth flooding into this country through the mineral boom, flooding the government with cash, which they didn't put away for the good times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now we've got a massive deficit we've got to deal with, and we're struggling post-GFC with a very difficult problem. Right, so it's a psychological thing as well.
We're going to come back to that in a moment, that issue. Alannah.
I don't think, Caroline, that we will see Clive on his deathbed asking those sorts of questions. I just don't think that's within his DNA. And look, I think this has been the most extraordinary exercise in hubris. And it's not just Queensland Nickel. Look what's happened at the Coolum Resort. And I will say this about you, and I don't agree with your economic analysis of March Ewen, but I do know that those tears were genuine tears, and that I understand how you would be so moved by the plight of those people. I mean, losing your job like that, I mean, it is catastrophic for people's families. It's not just a statistic, and you were there.
Is that a sort of bit of a backhander to Brendan O'Connor, your own colleague, who described those tears as crocodile tears?
I actually think extraordinarily highly of Brendan O'Connor. He's an incredibly decent guy. I guess his frustration was just that some of these policies. But I just want to say that I just want on record that I can actually understand when you are confronted with the reality of what is happening to people's lives. So you can see everything falling apart. I can totally understand even a member of the blue team being moved to tears.
OK, let's move on. The next question is from Liesl Preller.
This question's for Ewen Jones. In North Queensland, the mining boom provided jobs for an entire generation of kids leaving small farming towns where there was no work for them. And now that boom has ended, what's the long-term, the 10 to 20-year vision for regenerating industry and employment in that region and bringing younger people back into these small and ageing towns?
Yeah, Ewen, can you start by telling us what the unemployment rate, particularly for young people, is in Townsville?
Well, youth unemployment in Townsville is running at about 26, 27%.
Wow.
Unemployment in Townsville is about 7.2. But even that's not a real indicator, because if you have had a job for an hour in the last month, you are deemed to be not part of the statistics. So we are a city and a region that is hurting. We've had 20,000 jobs lost in the Bowen Basin, but those things there. The beauty about the mining industry is nothing goes away. Once the price kicks in, they can go back and dig again. But what we've got to do is think about where we go, and if I can talk about my city of Townsville, what we've got to do and what we're trying to do is redefine ourselves to where we actually go. Now, we've just had the Carmichael mine approved, and I think that's a good thing for us. Because if we can get the two things you need to develop the north of Australia and the north of Queensland are energy and water. And the one thing that we can't do in North Queensland is develop our industrial base, because the cost of power is just so huge. So the Carmichael mine's a big mine that will need some sort of power generation. If through using direct action and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and private money, we can develop a power plant or power station there of 1.2 gigawatts and make it a super efficient or an ultra efficient, ultra critical power plant. We can then bring the $5 billion concessional loan facility on developing the north of Australia. That can build the poles and wires, which will be a saleable asset, to bring that power to the national energy market. And what that will also do is be the catalytic event to open up the renewable energy precinct throughout the Kennedy electorate. Along the Flinders Highway is the best renewable energy precinct in the history in Australia.
A 10-year plan could take 10 years to describe that.
What is the other thing? And that's what we've got to do. It's got to be backed by science. It's got to be backed through a mosaic of energy support.
Thank you.
And it's got to be backed with education.
Coalbones, that's science.
Good one. Seize the moment. John Hewson, you've actually worked in the same area.
Yeah.
What do you think about this idea of having a giant coal-fired power station as the backbone of your new policy?
I think the Adani Carmichael mine is a massive mistake for this country. It's a massive mistake from the point of view of climate change. I mean, the climate change numbers are that about 75% of known coal reserves today cannot ever be mined if we're going to meet net zero emissions by 2050. So to contemplate opening a large new mine simply for the benefit of exporting that coal to India, it boggles my mind. Having said that, I think there are some interesting projects around in North Queensland, which I've actually worked on one, and I'll declare an interest for the last couple of years. As many of you know, the sugarcane industry is in a very difficult set of circumstances. And here we've got in a project I'm working on, 230 growers came together and let's see what else we can do with sugar. So instead of just extracting the sugar from the cane, they keep the waste, the bagasse, and use it to generate electricity. 100% green renewable energy. And that gives the farmers another income stream. And ultimately they can develop ethanol as well. So what you can do is have a game changer in the sugar industry by a simple application of technology. And I think that's where a big future exists for Northern Australia, is applying technology. And you can have a lot of renewable energy generated in the sugar industry all the way down the coast if you just apply that simple model. From the point of view of keeping the kids on the farm, the model we have, build a plant, a mill that's about 100-year life. You pay back all the debt and equity under the model in 25 years, and the family get to own it. Those 230 growers get to own it for the next 75 years, pass it on to their children. Now, these are solutions that have got economic benefit, obviously jobs and growth, but equally very significant social benefits. And they keep families together, they keep the industry going, they rejuvenate a town like Townsville.
Okay. All right, we're running short of time. Alannah, you'd be quite familiar with many of these arguments over in Western Australia.
Absolutely, and can I say, I would think that a far more 21st century approach would be developing renewable energy in the north of the state, and not just, it's also developing the technology surrounding renewable energy, and that has been a great, I think, misstep that occurred with the Abbott and now continued, unfortunately, with the Turnbull government, that our ability to really participate as fully as we should be in creating that technology and creating the jobs from that technology has been underplayed. Also, can I just use another example of what can really happen in the north?
Can you make it a brief one?
Very quickly. Cattle. Rather than just rounding up our cattle from our pastoral lands, putting them on a ship and taking them off to Indonesia, there is enormous potential for us to really be downstream processing, for irrigating fodder crop, finishing those cattle off, improving the genetic breeds, creating, re-establishing the abattoirs and the meat processing and the product development. And that is one of the things that will drive jobs in Northern Australia.
OK, before we go to our next topic, we'd like your help to choose our final question for tonight. Check out our two most recent tweets from the Q&A Twitter account and retweet the question you'd like our panel to answer. While we're waiting for your decision, let's take a video questions from Lionel Pipinko in Queanbeyan in New South Wales.
I'm the product of a private school education. Even though my time in high school was in the 90s, the resources I had access to were better than the resources I have access to now as a teacher. Only 5 years ago, the school I work at had the blackboards replaced with second-hand whiteboards, and we just upgraded our classroom projectors to standard definition. I spent a lot of my own money providing quality technology and quality media content that my school cannot afford or finds too low a priority to fund. Our teachers expected to fill the gaps non-wealthy parents cannot fill. And if a private school can afford to pay for a new tennis court, why do they still get a desirable slice of taxpayer money per school? And my students can't even get access to a proper heating and cooling system.
Jane Caro.
Well, indeed, this is the great dilemma of education in Australia. We have one of the most unequal education systems in the OECD. We have as much as 6 years gap between our highest and our lowest performing 15-year-olds. And Gonski, which is not perfect, but which is the best option we've seen in terms of funding going to the right kids, because it's evidence-based need which will attract the extra loadings required. Gonski is a really sensible, well thought out, simple to understand idea that does something that we've been unable to do in Australia for decades, which is treat all Australia's children as if they live in the same country instead of separating them out. It actually terrifies me if we don't go through with the final 2 years of Gonski and we keep relying on the goodwill of teachers to fill in the gaps, as this very good questioner and obviously dedicated teacher points out. The average spend by a teacher in a public school out of their own pocket, average, is around $1,300 a year. Some of them, therefore, are spending a great deal more than that. And teachers, this may shock you, are not the most highly paid people in the world. I know of one school where the budget ran out for the cleaners and the teachers found that the cleaners, who were even less well paid than the teachers, were paying for their own cleaning products to clean the school. The teachers, therefore, lobbed in and bought the cleaning products. And then we hear about schools like Scots College that made a profit of $3.5 million last year and gets $6.3 million in public subsidy and charges up to $30,000 a year in funding. But we cannot take a dollar from those schools for some reason I've never understood. Worse, people keep telling me Gonski's too expensive. We can't afford to do Gonski. We can't afford not to do Gonski, in fact, but we can't afford to do Gonski. You know why we can't afford to do Gonski? Because
budget deficit.
No, because no school can lose a dollar, which means Gonski is actually more expensive than the formula would make it if the formula was followed properly. Because some schools, very, very highly resourced schools, might lose a little bit of their public funding if the formula was followed properly. Because we say they can't, Gonski is more expensive than it should be. In other words, we are justifying not properly funding the most disadvantaged schools and the students they teach because of the cost of continuing to public fund the wealthiest schools. That is outrageous.
Caroline.
Well,
That's how, the questioner and a number of questions along these lines, actually, but it does appear that this public-private debate is going to re-emerge during the campaign.
And I admire your passion, Jane, and I disagree with you entirely, completely and entirely. And the reason I do is that all Australian children deserve to go to schools that are funded by the government. And at
public schools.
No, at the moment, we have a number of parents who, for various reasons, want their children to be educated in a private school because they want their children to be educated at a Muslim school, or because they want them to be educated at a Jewish school, or because they want them educated in the Catholic tradition. And they are prepared to pay for that, and pay for that they do. And at the moment, the government funds a private school student with less money than a student in a public school. You know it's true.
No, by 2020, some of them, like for like, will be getting more money.
If you send your child to a private school, the government gives that school less money than if you put your child in a public school. So if you take all of the private school children out of private schools, out of those small Catholic schools that charge maybe $5,000 a year or whatever it is, if you take them all out and you put them in the public school, you're going to have to fund those public schools with even more money than you're paying now.
No, because you get economies of scale and you also don't concentrate all the disadvantaged and most expensive to teach kids in the same underfunded
Jane, can
schools.
I just interrupt you? Because we had a questioner in the audience who just got a hand up. Actually, you had a question on this as well. Jane Worsley.
So the Sydney Morning Herald recently reported that 20 private schools actually receive $111 million in taxpayer funding, allowing them to build tennis courts, theatres, Olympic pools, and then the public schools that just struggle to get money to have air conditioning in their buildings to endure during summer. So is it about time we strip all this taxpayer funding to private schools who are clearly well off enough to build these extravagant facilities and reinvest the funds into public schools who desperately need more funding to provide the most basics of facilities?
Okay, John Hewson.
Look, just a couple of comments. I totally agree that an approach like Gonski, and Gonski's does need some refinement, is fundamental to actually addressing this issue. It doesn't mean, though, that you just move everything out of private schools and put it all in public schools.
That's not what
Gonski
says.
That won't work either. What you need to have is, I think we need to have the debate we're about to have in this election campaign, principally, I guess, fed by some of the comments that Malcolm's made, where he's prepared to fund public schools, private schools, should say, but not public schools, hand that total responsibility to the states. Now, that has created a set of circumstances in which we will get, I think, very significant debate on this issue. And there's going to be a very interesting, I think, tussle as to who's got the right set of data here. I tend to agree with the balance of the two of you rather than pick either of you, because I think you both make very sensible points. But bottom line is, if we're going to actually have this innovation revolution, we have to go back to where we start, which is what we teach in schools and how much money we put into education. And basically, we need to put more money into education. And a lot of Australians, I think a majority of Australians, would be prepared to pay more tax if they were sure that's what would happen to that money. But we don't have that realistic debate. We have this debate in the context of maybe an $80 billion cut from the Commonwealth of the States, or whatever the numbers are, which you don't get to the truth. So I hope the election campaign actually goes down the path of having a balanced discussion of private versus public, funding of both, but in the context of recognising we should be doing much more in education as a whole.
All right, Alannah.
Thank you. Look, I think this is a massively important issue, and I'm on the board of a number of low SEI schools, and sometimes I weep when I look at the standard of the resources, the physical resources that one of those schools has. Another has been very imaginative and has been able to go out and get a lot of private sector donation in order to give it the resources to transform education. And that is because there is a particularly magic principal and deputy there that have been able to do something completely different. It shouldn't be dependent on that to get a good outcome. And this is a question of fundamental fairness and equity, but it's also a major economic issue for this country. If you look at our results, we are so far behind the OECD and getting worse, particularly at our two bottom quintiles. Now, that is going to absolutely reduce our ability to be competitive in the 21st century. We have to do something about it. And whilst money isn't everything, it is certainly an absolute necessity. And the fact that these private schools advertise their resources to attract people into them is evidence that resources do count.
Okay, Ewen, if you can, I know it's hard, but keep your answer relatively concise, because we've got one more question.
I went to a state school, I went to a private school, my kids are educated in the Catholic system. Can I just say thank you to the teacher for what he does? My wife's a teacher, my younger brother's a teacher. What we do from federal government is we want to empower the local community, principal autonomy, so we make their funds work efficiently. And there is enough money in the system. We've got to make the funds work efficiently. So if the principal autonomy, school engagement and quality teachers. That's the thing that a federal government can really have an input on. University education, making sure that our teacher quality is as good as it can possibly be. That's the thing the federal government should be. And just finally, it's the whole thing about the government that spends the money doesn't raise the money. Again, and it's a federation issue.
Okay.
No, but because you don't want to spend money on it.
Actually, can I just... Ewan, can we have a quick yes or no answer on this one? Is the Gonski funding model dead?
Well, you can't give a yes or no, because Gonski didn't exist in the first place. What Labor put up was what Gonski did.
So there is a funding model. Is the model put up? Is that dead or not?
We'll get something that works. We'll get something that works.
Sounds like a no.
Okay, all right. We have time for one last question. It's one that's been chosen by our Twitter audience who wanted Lynn Flanagan to ask this question on euthanasia. Hi, Lynn.
Hi. My question is, the euthanasia debate polarises people. Bob Hawke has said in the last week that politicians are too cowardly to vote for a law regarding euthanasia or assisted suicide. Do you agree or disagree that the introduction of euthanasia is up to the politicians?
All right, we'll have to have quick answers on this. John Hewson.
Well, in the end, I guess it's going to require legislation, and in that sense there'll need to be a political vote, and I think it should be a conscience vote. It's not an easy question. As you say quite rightly, it's quite a divisive issue. I mean, I've agonised over this for quite some time. I know it happens in many cases already, but it's done illegally, I guess, technically. I'd like to see a system developed where that wasn't the case, but you'd have to have very tight safeguards on when it can be done, the circumstances in which it can be done. That's very difficult to do, and relying on politicians to define some of that is going to be a very difficult process. But in principle, I think we've got to move the public debate in that direction, and in the end, to the extent it needs legislation, should be a conscience vote.
Alannah, Bob Hawke said politicians too cowardly.
Look, I think there's an element of truth in this, unfortunately. As co-convener of the Dying with Dignity group within Parliament, we've actually put forward various pieces of legislation. I think there's no doubt that for decades now, well over 70% of Australians want the opportunity to choose the way in which they go if they're assessed, particularly with a terminal illness. And I just think it is time that we got up there and that we were prepared to legislate. The problem has always been that the fear that those people that are opposed to this are going to use their vote more than those people that support it. I actually think this is wrong. I think that to me it's very parallel to marriage equality. The majority of the community moved there quite some time ago, and really I think as politicians, we should be put by the electorate to the test. Ask everyone before the next election. You go and ask the person that is standing in your electorate, will you support Australians having the right to make the decision about the way in which they die?
Ewan Jones?
I agree with John. I think it should be a conscience vote. I have no idea how I would vote. My biggest concern on this is elder abuse, because I think it's very, very real. And I think people being conditioned to say, yes, my life is over. Those are the sorts of things that I worry about, because, again, we see it in our offices. That's my biggest concern around that.
Jane Caro.
My 85-year-old mother is a passionate supporter of voluntary euthanasia. And in fact, when I see her and her feelings about this subject and how strongly she feels that she should have the right to decide when she wants to go, regardless of whether someone else thinks she's suffering enough to be allowed to go, I think there's a form of elder abuse in the way that we talk about it and the way that we do not give people that choice, because some of them make the choice in much more horrible ways, much earlier than they otherwise would if we gave them the right to make the decision. It's as if when people get old, we start to say to them, oh, you're not capable of making those decisions anymore, we'll do it for you. Go to any Dying with Dignity meeting. It is full of elderly people who feel passionately about this subject. We need to take their feelings seriously. Most of us won't die the way we hope. I certainly want the right to make the decision about how I leave the world.
Caroline.
Jane, I really admire your passion and I disagree with you entirely. And the reason I do is because I'm very concerned about where this would go. So we all know, for example, that Belgium introduced a law which allows for assisted suicide and now that law has been extended to children. So they now put down children in Belgium. And we know also that they have put down a 25-year-old woman who had broken up with her with her boyfriend and was suffering from depression. We know that 25% of the cases that we've seen in Belgium, the people who were euthanised did not themselves decide that they wanted to die. A doctor decided on their behalf. So I'm very worried. And people have said to me, oh, well, Andrew Denton has looked at that and he's fine with it, so we're good to go. And to me, that's just not good enough.
But that's not the model that is being seriously... It is not the model that's been seriously contemplated. Of course...
Then let's have a serious conversation about where it might go.
But I think it's... But we've been talking about this for years and there has to be some progress made. And I would really hope that we would see the Liberals being given a conscience vote on this issue. Have you got a conscience vote on it?
Most of us go out at the end of the
Panellists, we're over time. This is one we'll have to come back to in the weeks to come. That's all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, Caroline Overington, Ewen Jones, Jane Caro, John Hewson and Alannah MacTiernan. Thank you very much. Now, next Monday, I'm taking a break from Q&A. Julia Baird will present a special edition of Q&A. The Christian Church has taken the lead in some hotly contested political issues lately. I think we're just talking about one of them. So we're bringing together a panel of Christians to discuss the role of the church, in the Christian Church anyway, in politics today. Joining Julia will be Progressive Anglican Minister Tiffany Sparks, the man the Catholic Weekly calls a rock star philosopher, theologian John Haldane, the head of the influential Australian Christian lobby, Lyle Shelton, Indigenous pastor and community leader Ray Minicon, and broadcaster, journalist and church elder Julie McCrossan. Until next week's Q&A, good night.